Ah, welcome. You're just in time. I seem to have gotten a rather, let's say, interesting letter. It seems that a lot of adventurers will be making their way to what most would consider the New World, the land of Tural. On one hand, it says that the boat's not going to be ready for another 5 to 7 months for the voyage, which I suppose is easy to go, all right, well, 5 to 7 months is quite a long time from now. On the other hand, 5 to 7 months could pass by in the blink of an eye. Before we know it, we'll all be ready to travel to uncharted lands, new adventure, meeting new people, and it raises the question of what do I do with this cafe? I suppose I could go ahead and open a branch cafe in Tuliolal, but so much planning to do. Now, beyond that though, there's a bit of a conundrum that tends to come up in people are preparing for this wondrous new voyage and this new adventure, and some people go, well, that's not enough time to do anything. And yet we still have some people that will naturally go, well, for the next 5 months, I now have nothing to do. And the question then presents itself, well, what can we do? What is there, in fact, to do before our journey to Tural? And so I've been contemplating that. And today I'm going to have someone come by the cafe that I think will be able to help shed light on the answers to that question and hopefully present at least one option of a way for us to help pass the time until our voyage is prepared. Hey everyone. Today I want to talk about a very specific topic. I feel as though within the 14 community there's this mindset, this kind of belief that between patches or between expansions, there's really nothing to do in Final Fantasy XIV. And while I know that Yoshida has said, between content is the right time to go and enjoy other games, and I do that myself, I've also seen a lot of times people going, well, I want to play 14 and I love 14, but between content, there's just nothing to do. So, starting with this episode, and for the next roughly 3 or 4 episodes, I want to bring on content creators and people well known within the community who are very good at coming up with their own content and their own way of fulfilling that need for stuff to do between content we get from the Final Fantasy XIV team. And to start off, I couldn't think of anyone better to have on than Angelus Demonus. And that's because he is very well known for doing deep dungeon content. And what that is, for those that don't know, is a roughly 100 to 200 floor, depending on how far you want to progress, dungeon where each floor is randomly generated. You have monsters, you have treasure chests, and you have a bunch of traps. And it can get very complicated, and we'll get into that more later. But I thought that this would be a very good way to kick off what can I do between provided content. So, with that being said, Angelus, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for
Hello.
joining us today. How are you?
Good. I am doing great. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Where are you joining us from today?
I am in my home in front of my soon to be updated battle station.
Battle Station, you say?
Yeah. Nice
Wow.
PC
So,
battle station. I love calling it that.
I've seen from your YouTube videos, you have quite the setup. I really like your keyboard. It's so cool.
Yeah. Really unique keyboard. Definitely got it because of like ergonomic purposes, but it's really treated me very well over the past year and a half, I think I've had it for.
It looks neat, but like I say with everything, we'll get into that a little later as we talk about your YouTube channel. Tell me, what are you drinking for this interview?
Good old water. Nice and simple.
Funny enough, me too. I don't know about where you live, but here, the past, I'd say 2 days, the temperature's just plummeted.
Mm-hmm.
So I've pretty much been living on cups of hot water from my coffee maker. because I don't want to have too much coffee.
Yeah,
So it's decaf green tea and hot water all the way for I'd say probably the past 2 to 3 days, and honestly probably the rest of the month at this point.
nice, nice.
So tell me a bit about your background. What do you do outside of Final Fantasy 14 before we jump into in-game stuff?
If I'm not doing 14, I'm doing some other gaming. A lot of what I also do is kind of revolved around whatever is like streaming and content creation. So I'm either editing videos, thinking about other ideas, or like planning out things for the future. So it's a lot to do around content creation. I mean, outside of that, I do like to eat, I do like to travel, so that's also very fun. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it for me.
So when you say travel, I mean, is it just places that you want to explore for fun, or are we talking like to Fan Fest or
I love to do FanFest. I was trying to do the one at NA, but I didn't get through the lottery, and I didn't push any harder than that. Like I guess I could have, but I kind of just like was seeing if I got in lottery and then just stopped my pursuit of the tickets. But also, I had been to the one previous to that, so that's kind of why my motivation wasn't as like as much to go for the one that just happened. But I would still love to go. But no, I like general travel. My family likes to do quite a lot of travels, usually like once a year to like different locations around the world. Sometimes I've done so much when I was younger as well, and it's been fun because I love culture. Culture has been one that I've loved to learn about, to explore. And actually that's one thing that I've been thoroughly been loving while streaming, because my audience has is literally just a mix of everyone from different countries. So I almost get the cultural feel whenever we have like some random discussion, like even something as simple as like what you ordered at a restaurant or like how you say hello to people. Like you just get different perspectives because people just live different places. So that's mostly what I like about traveling. But yeah, it's just a multitude of different places.
actually, my college degree is in anthropology. I absolutely love culture as well. I've kind of been being a bit of a fanboy as the podcast grows because I get to see a list of every country where someone has listened to Coffee and Carbuncles.
Hmm.
And so as that list grows and I see, numbers of more and more people from this country are tuning in, admittedly, I've gotten pretty excited about it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
It's always neat getting different cultural perspectives on things because there are obviously big differences that we see about culture, but also subtle differences that you don't really know or expect until you actually start talking about them and someone goes, "Oh, well, I do that thing differently."
Yeah, I mean, I had a conversation with a friend in Europe who, like, just even just the discussion of what do you say in America, like, how do you say hi to people? And we're like, yeah, you shake their hands, and they're like, wait, you shake hands? We don't do that. We would never shake hands as like a formal, like that would be more formal, you know. So even something as simple as that always every time I hear it, like I love hearing it, but every time the conversation comes up, it's just so fun to listen to and just talk it over because it's great just to hear the massive differences.
I couldn't agree more. In college, I actually got to do a lot of English as a second language teaching both while attending college and after college.
Mhm.
And that was such an amazing experience.
Nice.
But cultural studies aside, how did you come to the Final Fantasy franchise? Like, is 14 your first Final Fantasy game, or have you been playing it since you were little, or
It's remembering this story like when I was so much younger. How I don't know, I was weird when I was younger. Like I had been like some weird like loyalist to like certain systems or whatever. I don't even know why I was. And I remember, and I'm saying that because for a while I would never touch like a PlayStation when it first came out, like the very first PlayStation. I don't know why. Like I thought the controllers were weird. Like I'd grown up on like Sega and like Nintendo, and so I'm looking at the controllers and it's weird and everything. But I had been away with some family, and my cousins had a PlayStation, and this was probably maybe like probably like super late 1990s or like early 2000s, and they had Final Fantasy VII in the thing, and I watched them play it for like a little bit, and I'm like, oh, I want to try that, and that was my intro into the series, into Final Fantasy, and I had been basically been able to play all the Final Fantasies, including 11, from 7 all the way up until present day. Um, so it's been just a part of my life for the vast majority of it.
have you gone back and explored the pre-7 games?
I tried to do when the Pixel remasters came out. I tried to do 1 and 2, which I got through, but I haven't been able to get through 3, 4, 5, and 6. Unfortunately, I would like to eventually, but I haven't quite gotten there.
Do you have a particularly favorite game outside of 14?
In the Final Fantasy series,
Yes.
mm,
Sorry.
no problem. Honestly, I would kind of throw 7 remake into that discussion, but it's hard because it's like it's not done yet. So I almost wanna like say which of the finished Final Fantasies, if you will, are kind of in that list. So putting aside remake, probably would put like 9 was really good. I really like the story from 9. I am kind of a big fan of 13 just overall. I know that gets a little bit of a criticism, but I really like 13. And honestly, like I would put 11 in there only because that has quite a lot of history with me. So that experience was very memorable. Kind of OG7. I liked OG7. I mean, that was the first one for me, so that has a lot of good memories as well.
That's fair. I'm curious to ask, of the 13 trilogy, which one did you is there one that you enjoyed more than the others? Or I mean, are we talking like you just like the trilogy as a whole or
So I wanted to try to get through 13.3, because I played like 10% of that and then I fell off of it. So I had actually gotten it on Steam, like kind of like within the past few years, but I wanted to get through the whole trilogy again, but I never got to that. So that's another one that's in the back burner. But honestly, between the trilogy, I liked 13.2 the most. I really liked the first one, but I thought 13.2 did an even better job of executing that game.
yeah. I I feel like even though you have a lot of differing opinions about the various Final Fantasy games, I feel like of all of them, 13 tends to get the most heat. I mean, I feel like people have very, very strong and unfortunately usually negative opinions about 13.
Yeah.
And from what I've seen, interestingly enough, when 13 came out, people had negative opinions about the trilogy. But I've seen recently, especially since it came out on Steam, a lot of people revisiting 13 and then going, I like it now. I like it
Mhm.
in compared to a lot of modern games. And that's been really interesting to see that happen online.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest criticism they got was that it's linear. And I remember on Steam when I was looking on Steam, like literally one of the tags is like linear. And I remember putting out a tweet one time, recently when 16 came out. And I was straight up like, if you guys like 16, you should probably check out 13. If you're complaining that 13 was linear, like I think you should go revisit 13. Because like 16 and 7 remake are like pretty on rails. They're pretty straightforward. So if you're liking these games, I mean, I don't like if your only holdback on like whatever you heard about 13 was like, oh, the game's too straightforward. It's like, yeah, I think you should try it again. Go back to it, see how you feel about it now. Yeah, every time I hear criticism about 13, it was always about that it was just too straightforward. But it had one of the best. I mean, I can't necessarily argue with that. I understand people's kind of dislike on that, but man, it had one of the best OSTs and one of my favorite battle systems in the entire franchise. That's the one thing that I really liked about that series too. The music was way too good.
The 13 soundtrack, regardless of your opinion on the game itself, in my opinion, is one of the best Final Fantasy soundtracks. 13.1 has
Mhm.
so many good tracks on it. And it just I actually have it. A lot of the songs are on my Spotify playlist, and
Mhm.
I just thought it was so well done.
Mhm. Yeah, I love him. And have you played 7 Remake on your end yet?
I have. I have.
You have? Yeah, and I remember playing through that game, and I got to a point in that game, and I was looking up, like, the songs, trying to get the songs in, and I didn't know who did the songs before. Like, I went into it just kinda blind, and one of the songs I got to, the comments were like, "Oh, this feels very 13-y." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, kinda feels very 13." So then I look up the composer, I'm like, "Oh, because it's the composer for 13." And I'm like, "This is why I like this soundtrack so much, no wonder." So, yeah.
So clearly, you have a background in Final Fantasy as a
Mhm,
franchise. what ultimately brings you to 14?
I don't know. Honestly, I think it was just I was still probably craving an MMO because I had come off of 11, kind of I would say finished my 11 experience a year and a half before 2.0 came out. And I guess when it was coming out, when 2.0 was starting to get its footing and start to do its thing, the opportunity was just there. I wasn't engaged with another MMO. A bunch of my old Link Shell members from 11 were kind of interested in hopping in, so we all kind of hopped in roughly around the same time. So that's kind of what got me into 14.
So you managed to avoid all the chaos with 1.0 then.
I was a laptop gamer for from 2004 till literally 2020. So my laptop at the time when 1.0 came in, they just couldn't handle it. So I mean, I think I had actually the collector's edition for 1.0, but I couldn't play it because my laptop couldn't handle it. And I was about to get like a PC just to play this game. So yeah, I avoided it simply because of that specs.
So in hindsight, not having that PC may have actually been a good thing.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I understand what happened with 1.0. Like, I get it. Me as kind of the avid gamer, it's one of those things where maybe you still wanted to experience it just to see how it is, even understanding all of the problems it had, right? Just so you had that firsthand experience. But yeah, I mean, I guess in the end of the day, it's probably better that I didn't.
I'm the same way. There's part of me that really wishes I had explored 1.0 more for like seeing Corthus before all the ice and snow.
Fair.
But at the same time, from what I've heard, there's part of me that's like, well, maybe it's good that I didn't. Who knows? Who
Yeah,
knows?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and
So,
I was still in 11, I think, at the time, so it would have been conflicting to kind of run two MMOs, but
so are you pretty excited about that 11 crossover coming then?
I am. I'd like to dive back into some of the story. I still remember a good portion of it when they did the teaser on one of the bosses for the Alliance raid. I'm like, oh yeah, it's this boss. So it's like I knew a lot of them. I mean, I only missed out on like one expansion, I think, for 11. So if they start putting that in, I wouldn't have an idea of what's going on. But the rest of them, I have a good gist of like the story and everything. So it's gonna be. I'm pretty excited to hear the music again too. Ugh, music for 11 is good.
I'm really interested to see sort of like what remakes or remixes we get of what 11 tracks.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that'll be I'm very curious obviously for the Alliance raid itself, but to see where we go with it music wise, because the near raids had some very interesting arrangements and music choices, and I'm curious to see what they do with 11.
Same, because you have already the instance of the Baldur's Arsenal, which used just the OG songs. They didn't remix them at all. They just left them untouched and just used them again. So it'd be interesting if if Soken does decide to remix them or just the OG ones.
So tell me about your first like you're starting out in 14. Is the character you started out with now the character that you use today, or was it a completely different character? And what class did you decide to start with?
In terms of my cat girl, it goes even beyond that. It's the same cat girl I've used since 11, theoretically speaking. I've never changed her. Actually, I changed her once, but I changed her right back. But no, I've been the same character. I don't like change. I just like kind of having this set character and just keeping it there. I mean, I think I still have. Oh no, I don't have my original Fantasia because I had to change it the one time. But I had like my original Fantasia for like years. Once we first got, and the extra one that we got back in Heaven's Ward. So I've never changed her off of the OG that I've used forever. And you asked what class did I start with? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, the class I started with, I think I started with, let's say I started with Archer. It's hard to remember. I'm pretty sure I started with an Archer, but then I definitely shifted into like, I think Summoner Scholar a little bit later once I got to like level 50 cap. It's hard to remember which one I did with, but I'm pretty sure I started with an Archer in the beginning days of my 14 journey.
A lot of people who listen to this podcast know that I'm a very avid role player.
Hmm.
And as such, I feel the need to ask, in your headcanon, is there continuity between the 11 version of your character and the 14 version, or are they completely different characters in your mind who just happen to look similar?
So no disrespect to your liking of RP. I have no business with RP on my end. But to your question, to me, I would consider it the same cat grill. The only difference really is the hair color. I basically matched almost the face, the hair style. It's just in 11 we only had like two colors to pick, which was like white and like brown. Whereas in 14 we can pick a whole, section of colors. And I went with blue when I went with 14. But generally, I would almost consider her the same cat girl from 11 to 14.
Neat. I've noticed that in a lot of your promotional stuff, your cat girl's usually dressed as a red mage.
Mhm.
Is that your primary class? Is that the class you prefer for deep dungeon content? What's kind of the story with the presentation being as a red mage?
I think I like the look of Red Mage. I think we were just talking about 11, and it's kind of that throwback to my experience with 11 because the glam that I use, like you said, for the promotional stuff, is a glam that is a bit of a throwback to 11. It's like the old Red Mage artifact armor that they use with the duelist hat and the scorpion harness that we can pick up from Eureka in 14. So it's that kind of like throwback to 11. And in my early days of Deep Dungeon, I was kind of the Red Mage main. But then, to be fair, early days of Deep Dungeon was like it's either Red Mage or bust because that's the only one that had the capabilities of doing Deep Dungeon to begin with. But yeah, I did play Red Mage throughout the entirety of Stormblood since it was the new job there, and I guess because during that period of time I kind of picked that as the branding, that's what I went for. So it isn't necessarily a resemblance of like the job I play present day, which has shifted quite a bit. But it is one that the look of it and the style of it is something I still treasure quite a bit because it is more than just FF14. It's like back to FF11 and all that stuff. So
I definitely understand. My summoner has had, I kid you not, the same glam since Stormblood. So I fully understand having an outfit and being like, this is my character's outfit. I'm sticking to it.
yeah, I mean, like, don't get me wrong. I mean, I play around glamours here and there, especially when they release new things. But I always have that red mage one ready to go. And actually, if I ever play red mage on my main character, it will be that climber. Like I don't even question it. Like I'm not even gonna bother. It's just okay, red mage climber. I'm just gonna use this. Like why would I not? Why would I use something else? Kind of thing.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because you're just like this is their outfit.
Yep.
This is what they rock in battle.
Yep. Exactly.
So starting to get into today's topic, when do you first get into deep dungeon content? Like were you there when it first came out, or did you take a bit to come around to it?
I had to make sure I got the date right. But no, I was there when it first came out back in July 18th, 2016. That's when Palace first came out in 3.35. No, I was there right at the beginning. I remember the patch notes. I remember looking through the patch notes. I remember like I mean D Dungeon didn't exist prior to the game. So, it was kind of what is this content? And I think what pulled me in was the fact that there's a leaderboard, the fact you can go in solo, and all those bits were kind of the quick thing that got me right into the content. And I remember my early days of Deep Dungeon was just because the leaderboard existed, I was just trying to just get myself on the leaderboard.
And now I believe I checked solo, I think you're in spot 4. Is that right?
So the solo leaderboards are separated by class. So each class does have a top 25. I do kind of pride myself in making sure that I am on the leaderboard for every job, which over time has been adjusted, and I have to kind of fix some of my scoring because the community's getting good, they're growing, so they kind of kick my score up the leaderboards on some of the jobs. But for the most part, I try to make sure that I have a name on one of those jobs, on all of those jobs that I've cleared on the Lodestone leaderboard.
That's awesome. For those that don't necessarily know, I tried to have a very brief covering of Deep Dungeon in the intro, but I feel as someone who regularly does Deep Dungeon content, you could probably explain it a bit better than I could. So could you explain what is Deep Dungeon in Final Fantasy XIV?
It's Deep Dungeon is, I guess, the quickest way I can describe it is it's very adjacent to what you would define as a roguelite or roguelike, whichever you want to prefer to go with. You have each instance is a set of 10 floors. 9 floors are a bunch of enemies, the last floor is the boss, and your goal is just to basically get through the 10 floors. The floors themselves, the layouts change every time you go in. The power-ups that you can pick up change every time you go in. The monsters generally they spawn in different spots, although we kind of know what monsters will show up in a set of floors. So, you wouldn't necessarily say that's completely random, but you still have to deal with, what's in front of you per room. Rooms have traps, you gotta avoid the traps that are randomly spawned in different locations as well. But it's also kind of this long type of run where you were mentioning it earlier, like one of the deep dungeons has 200 floors, one of the deep dungeons has 100 floors, and you're going in 10-floor increments. So your goal is to try to complete the entirety of those floors without dying, because if you die, that means the file is done, you're wiped, and you have to start back at the beginning. It's content that was kind of designed, at least originally, for a 4-man party, but you can go in with 3, with 2, with 1. And the thing that appeals to me about Deep Dungeon is you can go in solo, and specifically solo, you get a special title doing it. But the most important part is the fact that the content does not scale. Unlike Variant, that's the newer content that has released, that scales to your party size. So it'll I think reduce the HPs or something like that to make sure that if you're going by yourself, it'll be appropriate versus going with 4. Deep Dungeon does not do that. However, the enemies are stat wise 4 people is exactly what you deal with 1 person, and kind of the challenge and the thrill of trying to clearing it solo is so exciting because you just did something that 4 people can have a struggle with. So that's pretty much the big thing that has been what I've loved about that content. But also, kind of like I mentioned before, there is a leaderboard that kind of tracks your scoring. So there's a little bit of a competitive nature to it. And so that originally what drew me in, and that's part of the allure I think of what people have. That kind of feature does exist, and it's official. Like it's not something that the community is running. Like these things are just uploaded automatically by the game. So it's kind of cool to see that you have like a literal official leaderboard that Square Enix has on their website.
So you would say then that a lot like with someone who does track and field, on one hand, you are competing against others, you are competing against the environment around you, but primarily you're competing against yourself to do better.
That's right, precisely. I mean, it's very RNG riddled. The content is. I mean, a lot of the veteran runners can have a lot of control over how the RNG manipulates your run, but at the end of the day, you're still dealing with RNG. So it provides quite a lot of replayability, and so you could have you could play really good on one run, you just don't get the results in terms of scoring, and you can have a mediocre run, and just the game just gives you everything you need to. But that's kind of what makes it fun, in my opinion. That kind of randomness per run, and just you just don't know what to expect every time you go in.
And to the point that you and other people who make deep dungeon content have actually started coming up with challenges in regards to your deep dungeon runs. And in part 2 of this interview, we're going to dive right into that. And I'm very excited for it. We are going to talk all about deep dungeon challenges.
There's a lot. There's a lot. Over these years, there's been so much that people have thought about, that have attempted. Yeah, it's gonna be great.
And with that being said, we will catch you all in part 2 of this interview, and we will be back. Welcome back, everyone, to the second half of my interview with Angelus, and we are about to dive into more of our lovely conversation regarding deep dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV. Angelus, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
So, how many times have you cleared Deep Dungeon at this point? Do you keep track anymore, or are you just like, okay, there's another one?
Kind of it's a little bit of both. I do kind of try to keep track. Sometimes I lose track, but I do kind of look at my rewards at the end to kind of just count up and work with that. But I try to do it on like my titles for like I think both YouTube and Twitch. I try to have them titles when I go live. But for Palace, I have 48 clears. For Heaven on High, I have 76 clears, and Eureka Orthos working on 24 at the moment. While I slowly get through that deep dungeon and try to get all the jobs in.
And I realized that's actually something we missed in part 1. For those that don't know, there are actually 3 different deep dungeons currently in Final Fantasy XIV, with, I'm sure, expectations for a 4th later on.
Sure hope so.
I have no doubt. Can you go ahead and list off the 3 deep dungeons we have?
Sure. We had the first one is Palace of the Dead, which was released in Heaven's Ward 3.35, which I think I mentioned was July 18th of 2016. I'm not gonna have the other dates, but that one I just had up so I could look at it. The second one is Heaven on High, which is 100 floors. Palace being 200 floors. Heaven on High being 100 floors. That was released in 4.35. That is Stormblood. And then Eureka Orthos, which was just released in this expansion at 6.35. That is 100 floors as well.
So you're known in your community for actually not only clearing these deep dungeons, but making challenges of it. Can you list off some of the deep dungeon challenges that you and your community have made and tell us how these came about?
It's so funny because maybe we'll touch upon this a little later, but I mean, it's in the early days of Deep Dungeon. I mean, it was really like just getting clear was. I mean, what more can you ask for? It's just such a grueling challenge. Still, I mean, even up till now, you really don't have like a very large percentage of people. It's a very, very small percentage of people who even have the clear that can even say they have the clear. But yeah, nowadays it's evolved. I mean, people kind of still want to push the content further and further, right? They're not just satisfied with just the clear anymore. How do you further challenge the content? And even like beyond the title, like in theory, the tangible ones you have is scoring and the leaderboard. Because yeah, you can get your title that is the one in game that you can show off on your character and then presumably you will hopefully you get on leaderboard. But nowadays it's really tough. But then the other tangible one you have is the fact that you have each solo job that has a category in the lodestone. So if you clear on machinist, okay, you get the clear on machinist. Well, you can clear on summoner, you may not get a title, you can get the reward, but hey, at least your thing shows up in leaderboard if you get a high enough score, so on and so forth. But then it's kind of evolved into the more intangible things. Some people like I've done a decent amount. Some of my good friends have done even more than that. The ones I've done stuff for charity, which is a really cool one where we accept donations for people to basically nuke my palms. Like, hey, donate this money and I will use this palm on the next floor. So it kind of gives the audience a little bit of control on how the run goes. I may not want to use this thing right now, but hey, you donated money to a charity. I'm going to do it right now. That's been a lot of fun. We've been doing some speed runs as of lately, and also in the past few years, people have been doing 4-man speed runs, solo speed runs. That has a category in speedrun.com, which is really cool. They do have that set up there, so you could go and compete with the other people if you wish to do that. My friends like Vin Bazal, another content creator in Deep Dungeon, has done first person challenges, has done walking challenges, which is insane. And other gamers have done like no jobstone challenges as well, just trying to clear without the jobstone. So there is definitely a lot of variety in that. And I would say, and circling it back, like scoring is probably the one that is still the tangible one. That in itself is extremely difficult to try to master. But people will engage with the content differently, and at the end of the day, it's just all about just having fun with it. That's kind of what it comes down to, and however you do it, it's just having fun at the end of the day.
So for people who aren't part of the deep dungeon running community, when someone comes up with a new challenge, what is that like? Do they present it and then there's a race to complete it, or is it more just like a running list of challenges and someone's like, "Hey, this week I tried this one and it was a lot of fun."
It's more the latter. I wouldn't necessarily say it's too competitive, like our buddy Finn, who's done like the first person challenge and the walking challenge. I mean, that's more really for the show because he does it live, and it's just to showcase his ability to game and just showing what you're capable of doing in deep dungeon. I mean, if someone takes it up and does it themselves, that's completely on them. It's hard to kind of make like that competitive or tangible in terms of a competitive scene. But hey, at least you can say you did it, especially if you have like a recording of it. That's one way to go. In terms of just the other variety, it's kind of all in the same boat. Like, if you decide to do this thing, it's more just kind of opening the door for someone to see if it's useful to them, if they want to try it. And actually, one of the other challenges I did not mention before it, what I had been doing past couple months was what I call the one palm challenge in Heaven on High. Because my concept there, this isn't a challenge that is meant to be like, I don't mean it to be done by other people. But since we are kind of, putting a lot of information out, trying to help people in the deep dungeon to try to get their own clears, the concept of this one palm challenge in Heaven on High was how a lot of times on my runs I would get through like 1 to 91 and our palms are just absolutely pristine, and like the last 10 floors is literally victory lap. Like we can just like literally have a just chatting stream and I'll just clear because my loadout is just really really good. So I've done a thing where I would purposely sabotage my pomanders, go with literally bare minimum, and then try to clear that way. And how I look at that is that it just tries to give some type of realistic situation where someone who has 76 clears will probably smooth on through for a clear, but what about the person who's going for their first clear? So we try to replicate that experience and then try to problem solve it. Even if I don't clear, I've had people come to me and say, hey, this run was just really useful to learn your thought process and what you have to do. Because hey, if I'm going with like minimum palms, where I go with one of everything, that's why we call it the one palm challenge. We go with everything, like one serenity, one petrify, one magislite. What if the gamer who's trying to go for the clear has like one more of something, right? And I just make it to 99. Well, maybe that one more is enough for them to clear. So a lot of it kind of does serve as a little bit of an educational thing. I had back a little bit a few years ago, we did something we called the no sustaining potion run, where the sustaining potions, if you don't know what those are kind of one of the mandatory items we recommend people to have that gives you a kind of a passive regen that lasts 30 seconds, respectable amount of regen. That is one of the reasons why a lot of jobs like melees and DPS can survive the content. Otherwise, you don't have a healer. Like you're solo, so what's going to heal you? And these potions can pull it off. It's sustaining in Palace. It's the Inferior potions in Heaven on High, and then it's Eureka potions. The Orthos potions in Eureka Orthos, and they all do the same functionality that they give you this passive regen. But we had runs like on a tank where I would just take it off my hotbar and just try to clear without it. And there have been people who've come to me looking at those runs and saying, like, that's actually been a massive help because you look at the run as to how to survive defensively, how to get through this fight without this help that is supposed to be there. And it's given them a little bit further education on trying to clear the content. So at least on my end, and some of my friends as well, some of those challenge runs are more to boost the knowledge of people trying to get into the content or trying to get their first clear.
And what I really enjoy, and I've noticed, especially on your Discord, but within the community as a whole, is that we were talking about how it's not really a competition. It's, everyone just trying to do their best and get further and hopefully clear. And I've seen people posting that, oh, I made it to like floor 197 out of 200 and then I died. And you still have everyone going, well, that's awesome. Good job. And being just really, really supportive in regards to no matter how far people get with these challenges or even just deep dungeon without a challenge, still going, well, that's great. That's still really far in.
I think the coolest thing that I've seen with this community to that is first and foremost, nowadays you're looking at 2024. People have been there. You have a new person coming in, they die to something, and you have people being like, "Yeah, I know what that feels like." Like people have failed on the beef. I think a week or so ago, we had someone fail about 10 steps away from the bench, timed out because they just didn't have enough time. Like that was their first potential clear, and it's just like, there are people who have been there. Like remarkably enough, people have felt that. But yeah, it's all about kind of a little bit of a paid forward mentality as well. One of my favorite things that I saw on the Discord was someone, I forgot what specifically they died to, but they're like, oh, I think it was silver chest exploding, and they always can kill you. If the silver chest explodes and you're just low HP, that can just wipe your run. And they're in here, they're so kind of angry at themselves. So like, man, I died to the dumbest thing ever. I've done like X amount of runs. I can't believe it. This run was so good. And I had to lose it by just being dumb. Like they felt so bad about themselves. And then literally like within like the next like hour, you had like six other people being like, "Oh yeah, I died to that too." Like they posted their own video clips, they showed their own screenshots. Like, yeah, this is how I died to. Like they're just like, "Yeah, I've been there. Like I get it." Like you might think it's dumb, but the reality of the matter is it's normal for us because it happens and it's just part of the experience. And it's, yeah, it sucks. You can feel bad about it, but it's okay. Like you're not the only one who did it. And that's probably been the coolest part because this challenge is hard. Like this is a very grueling challenge. And sometimes you kind of need that kind of, mental support, if you will, to just find something to keep the motivation going. And I remember one of the other ones where this doesn't happen as of recently, but there is people who had kept track of their runs and attempts in spreadsheets. And sometimes people actually get a little intimidated when someone comes in. They're like, "Hey man, I got the clear my first attempt. I got the clear my third attempt. I've been doing it for like 2 weeks. Got my clear." And you have someone who's been working on it for like 2 years, and it's like, yeah, like, do I suck? Like what's going on? Like why does it take me so long? But then you had an instance where their person was kind of quiet. They're not talking as much, and they come in like, "Hey, I got my clear." They show out their spreadsheet, and they have like 40 plus attempts. Like I died here, I died here, I died in like 10, I died in like 20, I died in like 150, died in like that. So it kind of gives that kind of realism to like what is behind the scenes. Like, okay, this person is not necessarily posting all of their fails, but they kept track of it. And this is their journey through the thing. And it gives that kind of, it's like, oh yeah, you know what? I've had these amount of attempts. Okay, yeah, yeah. Like it's it's not just like, it isn't me being like bad. This is really, really hard. So that's really what the community does too. They kind of do lift everyone up. They just want everyone to succeed. That's what it is because they get it. They know how hard this is, so they want to make sure that the person doesn't like shy away from the challenge just because they feel like it's too tough. Because people have taken a lot of time doing this.
And I always love seeing that in the community when you have groups that can come together and be supportive of other players like that. I think it's one of the best things about 14.
Yeah, I agree. Hmm.
So, switching gears a bit, what is it like when you are getting ready for a deep dungeon run? Or I guess I should say, what was it like the first few times? Did you have a pregame? Are you like behind your monitor with two Red Bulls and the Sephiroth theme blaring, hyping yourself up? Or are you trying to be pretty chill before you go in? What are you like pre-run?
When you mentioned the theme in the background, I'm usually pretty chill. I mean, a lot of times now it's I pretty much do Deep Dungeon strictly on stream. So I mean, I guess I have like a pre-stream ritual, which is basically just making sure things work. It's it. Does everything work? Okay, nothing to worry about. And then if that's fine, then I'm good.
Understandable.
Right? I mean, yeah, we got other things to worry about. It'd be nice to have like, like you're in like an actual like sports competition. Blare out some loud music. No, it's just making sure everything's good. And it's so funny because I think just because of that, like my attitude about it, like I've known some people who they get their clears and they're like they're so pumped, their energy is so high, it's like they can't sleep. So excited for me. It's like no matter what happens, like if I clear, if I like pass out right away. I'm like I'm done. Like 4 a.m. I'm sleeping. So I'm more generally chill about things when it comes to that. And even in the early days, actually the early days I didn't have such a set schedule, especially when I was initially streaming. It was basically, okay, do I have 5 hours I can play this game? Because I'm allotting the amount of time of how many floors I have to do. So I just want to make sure that this amount of time is, I have this amount of time to play. That's really all I cared about. Because then it's like in a way it's like it allows me to be less worried about other things, right? So if I have to worry about a time limit, then my brain will be thinking about the time limit. So I try to keep my mind kind of blank on that. And again, it's funny you mentioned the music because I like one of the toughest fights, especially in Palace of the Dead. is like Behemoth and Godfather, and you hear the track of Revenge Twofold playing, and for me, that song needs to play. That is the song, the battle, the boss theme of Deep Dungeon, and it that gets me in the mood. That gets me like really pumped up. But I've heard people, community members, where they turn that song off because it actually gives them too much energy. Like there is like I never thought about that. Like wait, too much energy. Like you're too pumped up. So like they need to calm down because they need to be clear headed. They need to be like focused on this challenge. So it's interesting to kind of hear those different perspectives from other people. Because for me, being more relaxed, more chill, and everything, it's just so counter to how I would envision someone else going for it. So
I haven't really thought about that either. That's a really interesting point. I mean, I guess, everyone does want to approach things differently and have different reactions to things. I haven't thought about that before.
yeah,
Huh.
yeah, and kind of like I kind of see myself, at least with deep dungeon content, to be kind of the doorway to get people in the doorway, right? So these kind of things are kind of important to me, right? I want to kind of make sure that we try to cover all the bases for someone to try to get the clear. So if something as minute as that thing is for someone, that's important to them. If something is troubling them, that they're having a problem with, we try to find ways to go about it. Like we had Eureka Orthos is actually a good example where that's one deep dungeon that you really have to focus on. A lot of people will say, okay, for the solo climb, like it's a challenge on your attention span, right? Because like you look away from the screen, you get hit with a telegraph, you're dead. That's it. It's really just that simple. And we had someone come in and they're like, hey, I suffer from, I have some pretty bad ADHD and EO is just kicking my ass because I can't focus. So it doesn't become like, like, oh, like too bad, just do. It's more like, okay, what are the solutions we have? Like everyone's just trying to like fire off solutions. So like we had suggested like, yeah, hey, do what I do. You know what I do? I talk out my mechanics. I'm like, okay, this thing will do this verbally. I say it out loud. Like this thing's gonna do this. I get a step away. Like maybe that will help, or maybe have something on that maybe will kind of keep your focus on. Like those are like like the very little things each individual may have, but you still want to try to have a solution for it. And that's been kind of fun trying to navigate that as well.
And I think that's one of the things that makes having a community devoted to various communities devoted to various pieces of content so amazing is that you can, as a community, help each other and come up with these solutions.
Yeah, like we I guess per community you probably have the more care for it because I mean that's what you're stuck with in a way. You don't have to spread yourself too thin to do a bunch of other things. Like this is the bulk of it, so you can dive even deeper into said content.
And I want to backtrack a little bit because there's something that we talked about during the break, and I remember thinking, man, I really wish that I had recorded this because you talked about only having maybe 5 hours to do Deep Dungeon and trying to, get as much done in that time span. I feel like for some people, part of the intimidation factor when it comes to Deep Dungeon is, oh, it's 100 floors or oh, it's 200 floors. And they feel like they need to try and tackle it as, it's 50 floors at a time or 50, 100, 200. And during the break, we discussed kind of just going at your own pace and taking it just in those 10 floor increments at a time. Would you mind elaborating on that for a little bit? For a little bit, sorry.
Yeah, no, for sure. Actually, I think even to today, I still get people asking me that question of like, "Hey, can I, can you take breaks in between, or do you have to do the whole set through?" Because to be fair, like, what's the perspective of the individual? I mean, if they're seeing my videos every time I upload it to YouTube or I do the run on Twitch and YouTube, it's 1 to 121, it's 1 to 100, it's 41 to 100. Like I do it in large chunks of like 5 to 8 hour runs. But I mean, I like to keep the momentum going. That's more the gist of it. But also, it's content for me. It's what I'm used to now at this rate for my content creation. But no, I mean, you go through kind of the traditional definition of roguelite and roguelike, where it's meant to kind of be a little bit bite sized. That you don't have to do the entire run in one go, or you don't have, you're not playing the game in one seating. Like you're doing it in little pieces and you're progressing that way. So, what I was mentioning earlier in the break was like, hey, you may not have a large chunk of time to game, but I mean, if you have at least 1 hour, that's all you need for the instance. And the instance is 1 hour long. So if you can spare an hour, you can do 10 floors a day, if you want to do that. Of course, the lower floors are going to go a little bit faster, but generally speaking, especially in the higher floors, you're probably you're not going to take any longer than an hour, no matter what floor set you're on. So that's one way to kind of look at it. Yes, it's a long challenge. Palace can average to 13 to 15 hours for 1 to 200. Heaven on High can average between 5 to 7. Eureka Orthos can average between 7 to 9. But you break them up into segments, 1 hour pieces, then you can chip away at the challenge. So yeah, definitely can think of it in smaller bites if needed, and that's what your time allots to.
And I feel like having that information, maybe someone hasn't thought of that, or maybe it makes things a bit less intimidating when instead of 200 floors, you think of it as, you know, various times doing 10 floors a piece. Like my raid group and I, we tackled it about 10 to 30 floors per week.
Mhm.
And there were definitely, due to the nature of Deep Dungeon, after some bosses, it definitely ended up being a boon because there are times where you're just like, I am so kind of emotionally frazzled
Yeah,
after trying to survive this that I don't think another 10 floors is a good idea at the moment.
that's completely fair too. That is 100% fair.
Did you start out doing Deep Dungeon in a group, or I've noticed a lot of your content tends to be solo content?
Mhm.
What led to that? Because obviously earlier in the interview we talked about Deep Dungeon being able to be handled as 4 people or 3 or 2, so why solo?
Well, in the beginning, I had mentioned that the thing that drew me into the content to begin with was the fact that you can go solo and that it had a solo leaderboard. So that was already established from the very beginning. Like, kind of during the course of my initial deep dungeon experience, I think I still remember like this was the time before even sustaining potions even existed into the game. It was more about I had this kind of journey of trying to get all the jobs with a score on the leaderboard. Like I would run through all the jobs, and there were limits. Like you weren't really, it didn't seem like you were intended to clear all 200, but rather it was just how high you can get. I mean, look, if I'm sitting rank 1 at like floor 130 on a melee and no one else is beating my score, I mean, hey, that's all I need to care about, right? I don't need to think about 200 at the time. But once they introduced that title in Stormblood, and especially when Red Mage seemed like it had toolkit to pull it off, that was where it was more you were trying to go for that clear initially. Now, there were times in Palace and Heaven on High where I did go up in a party because I was getting frustrated with the actual climb. Like we're talking about an era where no one had a clear, so you're trying to just find some solution to seeing if it was possible. So Palace, I did do I think at least one party climb. Heaven on High, I did at least one party climb as well during my initial climb to go for the solo clear. Eureka Orthos, I had never done a party, actually even more than one other person, except a little bit more recently when I did a collab. But I had done that one completely solo. But then, Eureka Orthos coming out, you already banked so much experience from Heaven on High and Palace, so I trusted my ability to try to get this in, no matter how long it took. But yeah, it's always been about the solo. That's kind of where it's been more entertaining to me. And also the whole idea that I don't have to worry about schedules, I don't have to worry about other people timing, and it's just I can just play whenever I want to. And that's been one of the biggest things I've enjoyed about the content. That's it's very challenging content that you can do whenever you want to. And it's still a very respected challenge. I mean, nothing, not to throw shade at all at like rating and all that, but man, like it's one thing that I've definitely not liked too much is the fact that if I try to do a raid, ultimate, whatever, it's like I got to worry about 7 other people, and sometimes that can be a headache. You have to get a schedule, you have to have a raid schedule. It's like sometimes I just want to log in and do whatever the heck I want to do, and that's where yeah, that's one thing that I really loved about the deep dungeon content.
And that's That's something that I find very interesting when it comes to different perspectives on content is some people look at Deep Dungeon, they're like, "Oh, that's terrifying." And it sounds like you look at Deep Dungeon and it almost gives like a sense of freedom in regards to doing the content.
It does. I think again, attaching it to a challenge that is respected, it's known to be hard helps too. If it was a pushover, then whatever, right? I mean, yeah, I can do it, but like, who cares about doing it? I think that does help the fact that it's very alluring to push the limits of, or to continually do it, or to put the content out there more as the content creator. Um, yeah, that's kind of what makes it special in my eyes.
I want to talk specifically about our three deep dungeons. Is there a particular dungeon you like more than the others? And which of the three presented you the most problems in trying to get a clear?
Let me do the second one first. So, in terms of getting the clear, like Palace was for sure the one that presented the most issues, but it's it's difficult to then input the other two. Reason why is because the knowledge that you get from any of the three that you use that you learn from does carry over. So I got frustrated with the palace. I had tried doing that for months, and then I literally I always say it, I rage quit at a palace in the early days of it. Had gone into a little bit of PvP because I was also engaged with PvP, but came back when Heaven on High came in Stormblood. But you're talking about an era where no one had a clear. So it's like kind of like what am I chasing? I'm chasing the impossible at the moment, right? So it's kind of like how can I keep my motivation going when it's been proven at to that very point that no one can do it. So it's hard. It was very hard to get through Palace. Getting through Heaven on High at the time when that released, you had at least two or three necromancers in the world. Like that's it, only two to three. So you knew that it was somewhat possible. The floors were a lot less. We were all still trying to go on red mage, and especially once you got the first clear in the bank for Heaven on High in the world, it kind of gave you that open door of like knowing like okay, this is possible. Someone did it, and some other people are doing it, so it's got to be possible. So that kind of kept the motivation going. And then once I personally got the Heaven on High clear, I remember eventually going back to Palace of the Dead, taking that knowledge from Heaven on High, and we crushed Palace. Like it took me 5 attempts, and I was in. And not only was it just 5 attempts in Palace of the Dead, it was 5 consistent attempts. Where initially, when I was first going for it before I rage quit, I was struggling getting through like 171, 181. I could barely get to 190. It was just so frustrating. And then I go back after Heaven on High, and I remember I go 188, 189, 190, 190, and I clear. Like then, and my takeaway was like, oh my God, I'm so consistent now. Like, but it was totally because that previous experience just carried over. Everything I learned from Heaven on High carried over. And then leading into Eureka Orthos, which I was very honored and very happy that I was still able to do Eureka Orthos completely blind. I mean, there was a world race to solo, there was a world race to party. There's so many people getting clears like left and right after the thing came out week one. But I stuck to my gun and I'm like, no, I'm gonna do this blind because I had done the other ones blind, and I wanted that experience. And it was tricky because Eureka Orthos being the one shot mechanics and everything, but my previous experience kind of like I would say filled 70 to 80% of the run. Like I knew how to use palms, I knew how to navigate floors, I knew how to handle enemies, I knew how to adjust to aggro. So it was just about learning the enemies. And I kind of wish I almost had the experience of doing a deep dungeon without that knowledge, you know, doing Eureka Orthos without knowledge because I don't know how it feels to just go into it blind. I don't know that perspective of going into that one blind because all of my previous knowledge just helps so much. It carries so much into that one. But yeah, that was my kind of journey as the beginning of Deep Dungeon. Now, could you repeat the first question you had, if you don't mind?
Yeah. Is there a particular deep dungeon that you like more than the others that you're just a big fan of?
So I have a big bias. I'll leave the bias out, but I'll explain what the bias is. But to me, I do like Palace of the Dead a little bit, especially since I do it mostly on stream. I feel like Palace of the Dead. has just a little bit more entertainment for the people watching. Just I think people just still think that that's the one that's the hardest. And I like showcasing that as the more difficult one. Eureka Orthos to me is fine. It's a pretty good deep dungeon. It's very different than the other two. It just frustrates me because I have to pay so much attention to that one. And I do remember the period of time when it first came out, Eureka Orthos first came out. We had been grinding Eureka Orthos for months. I take a small break to play Final Fantasy 16. I come back to do Heaven on High, and Heaven on High felt so relaxing and relieving. And it's like, okay, this is my happy place kind of thing. Where Eureka Orthos was just getting into like more just frustration and like it was really weird. But it's the way you have to do the content that provides that kind of vibe and feel. And I've actually found a nice middle ground now where I do Eureka Orthos like once every few weeks, but we're still trying to achieve our goals there. But it kind of feels a little bit better doing that as opposed to just doing it consecutively. Now the bias that comes in is the fact that I had the opportunity of doing AGDQ 2023. So anytime I think of Deep Dungeon, I think of that experience with Palace of Dead, where we did 171 to 180 on AGDQ, and it's like, how can I beat that experience? Like, there's no way that anything will ever beat that amazing experience. So it will always be Palace of the Dead, kind of at the end of the day.
That makes sense. Deep Dungeon as a whole, and I feel like we've talked about it quite a bit in this interview, tends to be a bit infamous in the 14 community. I mean, some people love them, some people just, are like, I'm never touching it. Do you have any advice for people who struggle with Deep Dungeon or are perhaps a bit hesitant to get into them? I know we already touched on splitting up, when you do the various floors, but is there any other advice you wanted to give our audience?
I think more accurately, you can say a few people love them and everybody else kind of may not know about it or dislikes it because of its kind of misconceptions, if you will. Although, to be fair, I feel like the misconceptions are a lot less than it had been before. I mean, I think when you say infamous with the content, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that people probably know it as the level spamming content, right? You're 1 to 60 back in the early days. You just spam Palace of Dead for 1 to 60 to get those levels, and then you're out. You basically only see 151 to 60 in Palace of the Dead, or Heaven on High. You see only like 21 to 30. That's like your extent of the knowledge. So, like, yeah, if like that's all I'm doing for hours at a time, I will get bored. like that's boring, Not to mention you have to deal with other people in the content. Whether they're going slow, whether they're going fast, you have no control over it. But when it comes to the actual like doing the content to its completion, I think that's where it's just very different. I think Eureka Orthos stands really well with party content with other people because it's very chaotic in there. So many things can go wrong so fast, but that's kind of what makes it fun. But I think if you're kind of apprehensive about the content, try doing a full run, whether it's in a party or for solo. If you're looking at the solo content, check out the videos, check out what other people are doing. Know that there is a special title at the end of it. I mean, your topic is about content in between droughts and everything, but I know around this time, you'll see people starting to do achievement hunting, right? Okay, let's run down the achievement list. What's here? And that's usually where we get quite a lot of people diving into Deep Dungeon because they're like, oh, Necromancer, Lone Hero, Once and Future. What are these titles? And that's when they start engaging with it. I think the biggest thing is probably right off the bat is you're going to die in Deep Dungeon. You're just gonna die. If you're going in it without very much information, like if you're listening to the podcast and this is all the first time you've heard about the content, you're going to die. But that's okay because a lot of us have hundreds and hundreds of deaths. One thing I like to say to people climbing is, the thing that is so incredible that I see people have, they go up to like 160, 170, they die to something, whatever it might be, like bad pull, boss. It stays with you. It's like it eats away at your brain. It's like I do not want this thing to happen to me again. And I think like I don't know comparatively how learning something in an ultimate fight or raid fight with a party is compared to solo, but I feel like because the solo experience, because you're by yourself, there's no one else to blame, there's no one else to yell at, there's no one else to look at. It's like the death or the failure or something, it just it stays with you, so you don't want that specific thing to happen again. Now you could die to something very differently on the same floor, that's very possible, but at least you probably won't die to that one thing. And I always say, like, hey, look, if if you find all the ways to die on those sets or those floors or something, you eventually run out of ways to die, and you'll just clear because you'll know every single way to die. And I think that's a fair way to look at it, because I mean you can't die a million times. You can only die so many ways. So if you run out of ways, okay, good, just clear. And that's how some of us in the community, that's how we prog, right? Like, I remember when I was doing my initial prog, no information, no knowledge, no Meiji guide, no videos to look at. Uh it's just like you would just run into things you just didn't know they did. Like, you just never saw it in like the first 50 runs because they never did it. And all of a sudden they're doing it because you did something weird. Okay, bank it in memory, right? Why did it do it? Bank it in memory. And a lot of times that's why we put out that information, so these guys, so the newer runners don't have the pains that we did. But still, at the end of the day, you'll find some weird ways to die. But that's kind of how it comes to. We know all of the weird ways that something can kill you. So you kind of do all these preventative measures to make sure it doesn't happen, and then you keep it consistent. But yeah, don't feel bad. Don't feel bad about dying. Just take it as a learning experience. I the other one I like to say is, like, the biggest way to die is like a silver chest. I mentioned earlier, silver chest exploding kills you if you're under 70% HP. And it's like one of the hard rules that I would say in Deep Dungeon. Don't open a silver chest if you're low HP. But I feel like that's one of those things where unless you die to one, it doesn't resonate. It doesn't sit with you, right? It's like you get it. You know, we're telling you this thing, but you have to experience it yourself. And sometimes that's what it comes down to. You just have to experience it. You eat it, okay. Logged in memory, your rite of passage, keep going. So
And I can definitely back that up as someone who has cleared both Heaven on High as well as Palace of the Dead. It you learn. I mean, that's the best way to do it. Is like any content. You get in, you fail a few times, you fail less, and eventually you succeed. Just
yeah.
that's how it goes. And there are some monsters, like for instance, my first few runs of Palace of the Dead, I didn't take mimics as seriously as I should have. And it really only takes once or twice before you see a mimic and you're like, that thing is kill on sight. My full attention, my full rotation is going that way. That thing needs gone now.
Yep.
But you learn. You learn.
Yeah, you sometimes you learn the hard way, but again, like, I think with the solo experience, I think that's what makes it unique, because it's, again, you have no one to blame other than yourself. So you just have to eat it. Just take it. Just learn. I mean, I think almost like maybe human nature. You're just going to make sure that doesn't happen again. So I think the learning is a little bit accelerated that way. And as long as you get past feeling bad about yourself or feeling bad about the situation, thinking that, again, quote unquote dumb, nothing's dumb, no death is dumb in Deep Dungeon because we've all done it. Um, you just go back in, just do it again.
So now that we've spent part of our interview going deep into Deep Dungeon, I want to start backing out of Deep Dungeon a bit, metaphorically.
Mhm.
So let's talk about the broader Deep Dungeon community. Can you reflect a bit on how it's grown since the first Deep Dungeon came out? And also, are there any other big names or major content creators within the Deep Dungeon community we should know about?
Definitely, as a blanket answer to that, I have a Twitch team called Team Solo, which is loaded with a bunch of Deep Dungeon creators that have been doing a lot of content in the past few years, if not more than that. There are more out there that exist, for sure, that are doing content constantly that some people call their main content that they do on a regular basis. So that's definitely a solid way to start in. Some of the ones that I would love to mention are, like, three of the guys that have been helping so many people. Our buddy Aurora Moon, who is one of the healer mains, as we call him in Deep Dungeon, because he just focuses on healer, but he's extremely good at it. And if you just watch his gameplay on Twitch, it's just insane what he can pull off. Seeing his progression from the very beginning, I remember when he first joined the community at the very beginning, and seeing where he is now is just ridiculous. Our buddy Finn Bizal, who probably some people will know if they're looking up information. He has guides out there on video guides and etc. He has actually the big scoring guide that likes to explain a lot of just how to score in Deep Dungeon. He's a big one to check out as well whenever he goes live. Our buddy Sadie Sassafras, who is in the EU hours, and he's been pumping out Deep Dungeon streams, and he's one of the best scorers. And one thing we like to advertise about him is that he's a controller player, and he's probably one of the best runners in the whole community. So gives a little bit of that different perspective. But the team solo as a whole, you'll see so many people in there that is definitely worth a look to check out. And yeah, like the community growth from the very beginning has been crazy. I mean, certainly I've been there since the beginning, and I'll definitely say that the intention wasn't to grow a community. That was definitely not my intention. My intention of doing the content and getting the clears was just to showcase it to people. I remember when I was first going for Pals of the Dead, my initial thought process was, okay, this challenge is so hard. I need to record this. Right? Like imagine like I'm imagining like one day I walk in with like the necromancer titles, like, hey, I got the sick title, and people like, cool, like, okay, how'd you get it? I like it's like I felt like I needed this tangible proof to be like, okay, here's something, because it sounded like such a ridiculous title to go for with so many floors and all that stuff. And that's one reason I like, putting up like the full run unedited, no anything, just this is the full run beginning to end, because it's almost like it gives that kind of authenticity to the experience. But then that's evolved into being study guides for people to see and study and prepare for their own runs. First and foremost, to see that it's possible. I think one of the coolest kind of non-connective ways the community has connected with, if you will, was how in the early days that initially you just had red mage clearing the first 3D dungeons, and it was just red mage only, red mage only. All you needed was one crazy person to finally break through to on some other job, whether it's tank, DPS, whatever. And once you caught wind of it, you look at Lodestone, the official leaderboards, you see that clear on that thing. You're like, okay, it's possible. And it opens the floodgates for people trying. And eventually you'll get someone who's recording their gameplay to have it recorded, put it up on YouTube or do it live on Twitch. And then people look at that, and then it starts trickling down the community of like, okay, this is possible. Then it goes into optimization, how to make it better. But that initial clear from that person is what opens up the gates to people, right? And that's been the coolest thing I've seen with the community growth over the years. That I think all someone needs to know is that it's possible. And then you start growing the amount of people that get in there. And in the early days, yeah, again, like I said, it didn't start off wanting to be community, but people probably just didn't have a place to share their deep dungeon experience. So that is where my Discord had come into play. That is just a whole bunch of people who've done the content. And you have this kind of mentality of paying it forward, that someone went through this journey, that they took all this time to get their clear, and now they've still been in the community for like a year, 2 years, and now they're seeing the new people come in and they're sharing their knowledge. It's like I no longer have to be the one answering the questions. A lot of these people know the perfect answer for it, and it just goes on and on, like over time. Like this is then it's been so cool because I feel like this is something that can just keep going. Whether or not I'm present or someone else is present, it's just going to keep going. And I think that's where it's evolved to. And now present day, it's just a lot of people streaming it. Early in the days, it was probably impossible to find someone doing something deep dungeon in the directory, specifically solo. I mean, you probably would see party people doing content, whether it's YouTube, but I'm always on Twitch, so I'm looking at the Twitch directory. But nowadays, you can almost catch someone doing it on a regular basis, or someone trying it for the first time, and that's been cool. And there's so many kind of streamers, smaller streamers that have almost made Deep Dungeon their content, that they're probably doing the same. They just want to showcase or like get their runs recorded. But the community kind of flocks to those streams because they just want to see Deep Dungeon. That's all they want to watch. They don't want to watch the raids. They don't want to watch, the kind of the just chatting community streams. There's nothing wrong with that. But they've kind of, in essence, grown up with Deep Dungeon, and they'll flock to that. So now you have almost like this like little streaming community that's been growing simply because people just want to watch the content. So it's been very fascinating to see over the years, to see where this has gone, and I'm very much excited to see where this will go as we move into Dawn Trail, as we move into the potential next deep dungeon and to see more and more people dive into it, and even more present day to see how people as they go through their achievement lists, or people who are going to spend the gap from now till Dawn Trail figuring out what they want to do into 14, that we see them come along and say hello and try to go for the challenge. So it's a lot of fun. And again, kind of staying on your topic of the podcast, it's been interesting seeing it in present day now, in leading up into Endwalker, and I think a little bit leading up into Stormblood, how this might be what you would call the content drought, but this is where our community kind of starts bustling because more people are doing this content and they're engaging with it because they have time with it. So it's like busy for us kind of in a way, where it's like everyone else is kind of they're finished with the raid and Savage, probably done all the ultimates and they're playing other games. So it's a very interesting flip perspective in Final Fantasy 14 in general with content.
It sounds like it's been a very nice and organic growth of the community over time, and I think that's great.
And the people, the community is not without its people, right? And the people we've kind of collected and have hung around are just really cool people. And I think that just really helps it out. I'd like to think that we kind of keep the quality gamers in the community, and that's kind of what you'll see. So it doesn't matter kind of who hops into your stream or who's there to help you. You're just getting quality information. That's all it comes down to. And I think at the end of the day, it's just as simple as you need help, we'll offer help. It doesn't need to get any more complicated than that.
We spoke about it just now. You mentioned Dawn Trail, obviously the next expansion for 14 coming out.
Mhm.
We had the full trailer for it come out just last weekend, and I was curious about your thoughts on the upcoming expansion. Is there anything in particular you're excited or perhaps curious about?
Yeah, nothing in the trailer though. Don't get me wrong, the trailer's good. And the job trailers are fine. I mean, the jobs are inevitable. I'm going to play the jobs. I mean, we're like my destination once the trailer drops. I'm sorry, once the expansion drops is to try to clear on those first two classes. But we actually had this discussion in Discord how we have people who dislike the futuristic look of some of the seemingly end game levels and the end game areas that they're presenting. But to me, that's precisely what I am very interested in. I love that kind of futuristic, techie kind of vibe, and I am all for that. And that wasn't in the trailer. I mean, they did screenshots and stuff, but that's what I'm really interested in, seeing what that is all about. I mean, I don't raid in the game, but I will do. I've been doing the story of the raid since Endwalker, and I think seeing them present the new series, I was actually pretty excited to like dive into what the story is going to be about. So that's definitely what I'm looking forward to, at least in the immediate of what we've seen so far. And then, whatever they mean by new plans of Deep Dungeon, which is something a bit of a hot topic we've had in the community, what that means. But whatever they have planned, I'm definitely going to be interested to see what they present to us.
I'm very curious as well to see what our fourth deep dungeon's going to be, and more importantly, where it's going to be, because it may not necessarily be in Tural.
The Eureka Orthos being under Crystal Tower was definitely a surprise by a lot of people. We get thrown out. I remember discussions we had were throwing out the Dark Side of the Moon. Some people had wanted it in Crystal Tower, but more like the first Crystal Tower because of like they had time travel and all that stuff. But it was interesting to see that their pick was, something that was a throwback to a previous Final Fantasy 3, and underneath Crystal Tower. So to me, that does open the door to just, I don't know. We have no idea what they're thinking about, so it could be literally anywhere. So
So now that we're at the end of the interview, I've obviously asked you a ton of questions, and I appreciate you being here for all of those. I think that this was a great interview, and hopefully, those listening have learned a lot more about Deep Dungeon than they knew at the start. But now I have to ask, do you have any questions for me?
have you always wanted to do podcasts?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So for most of my 14 for most of my time in Final Fantasy 14, I actually didn't watch a lot of content creators or listen to podcasts. I was off doing my own thing, and I really, aside from, I would say probably my IRL friends who were playing 14 and my free company, I had no desire to engage with the broader 14 community.
Yeah.
But eventually I ended up listening. There was some charity thing. I don't remember what it was, but I tuned in. There was a charity thing with a lot of content creators, and I ended up listening to the podcast Musecast 14, and I just really liked it. And from that podcast, I ended up being pretty enamored with content creation and with engaging with the broader 14 community. But at the same time, I had quite a lot of self-esteem issues.
Yeah.
So there's a pretty large span of time between, oh, hey, I'd really like to be a content creator, and me actually working up the courage to finally make a podcast. It was definitely not an easy journey, because it wasn't so much that, people were telling me not to do it. People were really supportive, and I'm super appreciative of that. It's more I had to get over myself and telling myself that the podcast wouldn't do well.
Okay, that's fair.
But once I actually put out episode 1, once I got feedback on the podcast, which I was mortified when episode 1 came out. I was like, I'm going to put this out and I'm going to get 30 comments going, for the love of God, never make another podcast. And in the reaction I got was so positive. And even I remember I got other content creators that I didn't even think would, glance at my podcast going, welcome to the community. Let us know if you need help or advice. And can we be on the podcast ourselves? And I was like, whoa. So it was a journey, but I'm definitely glad I'm here. So
Yeah, that's definitely relatable because like before I entered Twitch, I didn't look at anything. I think I looked at like guides here and there for like some fights, but I wasn't engaged in content. I only did it because it was like research, you know? Like, okay, how do I manage myself in this platform? Like, what am I doing? Like, what's the etiquette? What are other people doing? What are they up to? Kind of thing. So yeah, that's definitely relatable on that topic for sure. That just didn't really have a desire to look at content until it was something that you ended up wanting to do.
yeah, exactly. And did you have a second question?
Your least favorite Final Fantasy?
Oh gosh, you're just trying to get me hate mail.
I'll share mine too, so we can both get hate mail.
All right. So I feel weird saying this given that we just went through Endwalker. I'm not a big fan of Final Fantasy IV.
Okay.
And I don't have a specific reason. I just, compared to the other Final Fantasies, if I had to choose, I just was not a fan of 4. I didn't really connect with the characters the same way I did in 5 or 6. And I mean, the plot wasn't bad, it just wasn't gripping for me. Like, I didn't connect with the game the same way I have with other games in the franchise.
Would you say like it's your least favorite by the virtue that if you had to list the ones you've played, it's just the one that happens to be at the bottom?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to view it. I mean, I'm not saying that 4 is a bad game. I am saying that it's just not a game for me.
Yeah, because that's how I feel when I kind of list through the Final Fantasies. Like I loved every single one I played, but like if you had me like like list out where my bottom, like what are the ones I'm saying at the bottom, for me it ends up becoming like 12 and 15. But it's like I would never not recommend someone like they come to me. It's like, hey, what do you think about 15? What do you think about 12? I'm like, great Final Fantasies. You should go out and get it if you like this, and that. But the only reason I dislike 12 is because to me it just it didn't do anything to me. It was just like I didn't. The story was okay. I had no care for the optional hunts and all. The battle system was okay as well. It just didn't hit as hard as like some of the other ones that I felt. And then 15 for me was it's like if I played 15 now, I think I had a much different opinion, but I played it on release and there's definitely issues when it got released, so I kind of, felt bad in a way about that experience. I never got to try the DLCs. I kind of just played the base game and then, fell off of 15, but yeah, that's where I put those. But again, it's not to say that they're bad. Like I would always say that they're great. It's just all the other ones are just better to me.
Right. I mean, like me personally, one of my favorites is World of Final Fantasy, which, as I've explained on previous episodes, is basically Final Fantasy Pokemon, and that's why I love it. But that me saying it's Final Fantasy Pokemon, I guarantee you every time I say that, some people are like, that's awesome. But at the same time, you also have people that are like, cool, you saying that means I'm never touching it. And
Yeah,
it's just it's what you're into. It's perspective. It really is.
precisely. Yeah.
All right. Before you go, could you please tell us where to find you, your YouTube and social media names?
Sure. On YouTube, I am Angelus Demonus on YouTube at Angelus Demonus because they have handles now. But you will mostly find me on twitch.tv/ Angelus Demonus. Although nowadays I am simulcasting both to Twitch and to YouTube. So if you're only YouTube only, I'll go live the same time I go on Twitch. So you can catch me live on either of them. I am on X on Angelus_Demonus over there, and on TikTok as well, Angelus Demonus. So mostly, like I think if you look up Angelus Demonus, you should more or less find my stuff on Twitch and YouTube and so on and so forth.
And just so everyone knows, if you look at the show notes, I do have a link to his link tree. So if this still isn't enough and you want to find out more about Deep Dungeon content, feel free to message me on X or Facebook or Tumblr, and I will happily find a way to get you in touch with him. Also, for those curious, we've mentioned it a little bit. Angelus has a wonderful Discord for the Deep Dungeon community with what I think is a fairly unique name. Angelus Mimic Appreciation. As someone who earlier talked about their loathing for mimics in Deep Dungeon, can you elaborate on that name? Where did that come from?
But like I used to, I mean, I honestly, there's no real reason why I don't have this on my stream anymore. But I used to have a mimic counter that I kind of recorded manually how many mimics we would spawn on our climb up. And there are times when like straight up I just lose because we just picked up too many mimics. So it's a little bit of a sarcastic type of title, that we indeed love mimics because they end our runs kind of thing. But that's mostly where the name comes from. It's just that it's mimics tend to be a strong part of an individual's run, sometimes for the good, and a lot of times for the worst.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. This was a lovely interview, and I can personally say that I've learned a lot more about the Deep Dungeon community today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and I hope anyone listening also learned quite a bit. And if at any point anyone has any aspirations of hopping in, like I said, we are myself and a lot of other people are just ready to just unload information at you. So we will help you, and if you want those titles, we will be there to help you almost basically every single step of the way. So just find us, and we'll lead you in the right direction.
Well, once again, Angelus, thank you, and I hope you take care.
Thank you.
Well, hopefully everyone enjoyed that episode. I Angelus is someone that I have been very excited to interview. I would say probably since LunarCon. While I enjoy Deep Dungeon and it's something that I've been doing pretty casually since the content came out, I was really shocked at just how much the the Deep Dungeon community enjoyed the content and how big of a community had developed around deep dungeon content. Most of the time when I'm doing deep dungeon, admittedly, I'm just trying to clear and obviously not have to go back to floor 1 or floor 50. And so when I first found out that there were people who came up with all of these challenges and were enjoying the content that much, admittedly, I was a little shocked. But thank you so much to Angelus for coming on and telling us more about the community, explaining the challenges, explaining his own mindset when it comes to doing deep dungeon content. Now, it's my hopes that a lot of you are listening to this either the Sunday it releases or the Monday before patch 6.55. Hopefully, this and other episodes of Coffee and Carbuncles are sort of helping with that time gap between the game being up and the new patch being out. I know that when the servers are down, it's kind of a drag for a lot of people, so I hope this helps. Now, I've been asked quite a bit about what I'm looking forward to when it comes to the new expansion, and at the moment I'm a little lost on that because my answer for the past several weeks has been, well, as someone who primarily plays DPS mages, I want to see what the new mage class is. And now we've seen it, and I am overjoyed. I'm thrilled. As you all know, I love Final Fantasy VI, and also, as I've posted on social media, Kryl looks so happy in the trailer, and I feel like Kryl has just been through so much through the story of 14 that I'm happy Kryl is happy. And now that we've seen the new mage class, I can't really tell you what I'm looking forward to in the new expansion because I suppose ultimately I'm looking forward to everything. I'm looking forward to seeing what the dev team presents to us going forward. So with that in mind, I think I'm going to cut this outro a bit shorter than usual and just say that I hope you all enjoy this episode. And until the next episode, I hope you all stay safe, and I'll see you next time with a warm drink and wonderful guests. Take care, everyone.